Hello and welcome to the channel, everyone. We are now back on the Gunvolt series with the third entry, and I must say that NT has been on a roll with the mainline series. Two great prequels that continues to build off of each other and manages to age well in their own way would be enough for anybody to get excited for its third installment. When they showed off the trailers and gameplay footage surrounding the third entry, it should come to no surprise that your boy was smiling from ear to ear. They introduced a new melee character this time around who not only functions closely to that of a certain red warrior we all know and love, but she also retains the same elements you can expect in a Gunvolt game since she can strike multiple marked foes with a single flash. On the other hand, with what little they've shown of Gunvolt, our boy is not only sporting a new outfit for the occasion, it looked like they made him more mobile and even provided Gunvolt with a brand new technique offering faster gameplay for a character who already wants to stay on the move. Based off of that footage alone, it looked like we would be able to play as two characters at the same time, similar to how it was done in Mega Man X7 and 8, where you're able to switch between the two at any point, offering two different styles of play right at your fingertips. Needless to say, I couldn't wait for this game to finally release and play it a billion times like I've done with the first two games. Then Gunvolt 3 dropped, I played it and it was something else, I'll tell you that. Now don't get the wrong idea, this is not a bad game by any means. In fact, I'll tell you straight up that I did have a lot of fun with this entry. However, this game also did a few things that pissed me off and had me scratching my head wondering why certain decisions were made when it came to this title. What exactly are those things, you wonder? Well, if you want a more Cliff Notey version of things, I did a video covering this very topic way early on, and it's still up on the channel if you want to go and take a look at it. But in the meantime, I'm going to be covering those things in much greater detail here. But before we get into that, I want to give you a heads up that I am going to spoil this game from head to toe. So if you hadn't played this game at all and you don't want me spilling them guts, you may want to bail now before that happens. Here's a nice spoiler bump just to give you some extra time. We open up with a game playing as Kirin, who is a battle priestess, and she works under the organization called Shadow Yakumo. This group operates within the shadows and specializes in dealing with supernatural powers under the Septima category, and they are the original creator of the glaives we've seen Sumeragi use in the past. Kirin was sent on a mission to invade Sumeragi in order to deal with an inevitable awakening of a powerful being known as the Dragon Ruler, an adept so strong it's able to command every Primal Dragon in existence. Don't worry, I will explain what Primal Dragons are a little bit later. Sumeragi had kept this Primal Dragon sealed under their headquarters for the longest time with the use of those glaives I mentioned earlier, but over time those glaives got weaker and the seal was on the verge of breaking. Kirin had arrived just in time to use her talismans to seal the dragon back up, and it turns out this Dragon Ruler is none other than Gunvolt himself, who looked like he hadn't aged at all over the years. But as soon as he was reverted back to his human self, he immediately transforms into a dog without any explanation as to why this happened to him, and assumed it had to do with how Kirin's seals worked against powerful beings as strong as he is. But for now, it seems that a crisis was finally averted. At least that is what I would say if it were not for the Primal Dragon outbreak that was occurring all throughout the world. Many decades ago, while Gunvolt was still living a normal life with Quinn right after he took down Eden, Gunvolt's Septima had eventually evolved into a power that is considered beyond what could be a normal Septima at that point. This also caused him to physically stop aging, which is why he came out of that dragon form looking as young as he does. However, his powers eventually went out of control and he accidentally harmed Quinn in the process. He decided right then and there that he needed to surrender himself to Sumeragi and keep him under lock and key so he couldn't harm anyone else. They did this by using a lot of glaives to keep his powers in check, but he eventually changed into this violent dragon-like form. This is what is known as a Primal Dragon, and apparently this is what all adapts are doomed to becoming later on down the road. If that's the case, maybe Copen was right to eliminate every adapt after all. Since he was constantly giving off massive amounts of electricity, Sumeragi harnessed it to provide energy all throughout Japan and completely cornered the energy market for themselves. At some point they discovered that Gunvolt's electricity was emitting a strange wave known as dragon radiation, but they figured it was harmless in small amounts, so they did nothing about it. Cause you know, nothing bad is going to happen even if people are exposed through long periods of time, right? Well, fast forward to present time, and Samaragi now has a Primal Dragon crisis on their hands, since that constant exposure accelerated the time it would take for an adept to become a Primal Dragon on their own. Furthermore, this also affected any form of machinery ranging from security robots to city defenses, because they also relied on Gunvolt's electricity too. So in order to clean up Samaragi's mess and also help Gunvolt redeem himself, since he feels like he's to blame for all of this happening, Kirin and Gunvolt formed a division within Samaragi known as the Dragon Saviors. This started off as a two-person group, but over time, as they took down promising Primal Dragons and reverted them back to their normal selves, their ranks had grown into a more formidable team. Just when things were starting to become a bit more manageable, Japan was suddenly invaded by ATEMS, an overseas organization who is led by Zed and controls a powerful Septima known as the Golden Trillion. He and his executive members, which he dubs as his knights, had spread out in order to find these binding braids, the true glaives as they're called, since Samaragi and Shadow Yakumo based their glaives off of these things. The reason why ATEMS was seeking them out is because they wanted access to a secret chamber containing the Child of Hope. This sleeping child, who is named as Mobius, turned out to be the true ruler of the Primal Dragons, being as born outright, and instead of having a Septima like everyone else, he has what is called an Octima, which is a whole new level above your average Adapt user. Mobius was able to resonate with Gunvolt and showed him a future where Gunvolt had destroyed everything, and Zed explains that Mobius has an ability called Astral Order, allowing him to see many different futures. Then he is able to pick any one of them to become that reality. Furthermore, if Mobius awakens, the entire world will be submerged in dragon radiation and force adepts to awaken into their Primal Dragon forms, dooming the entire world in the process. Zed couldn't trust this powerful being in the hands of Samaragi, and well, I can't say I blame him given everything they've done up till now, and took matters in his own hands. He plans on having Lila use her Septima powers to control Mobius while he's asleep in order to guide the world into a better future, like he's playing Xenoblade. By the way, this Lila character is basically another version of Jewel, except without the ability to talk. She has far better control over her Septima ability, and Luxia, which is her name, is arguably stronger than Lumen since she doesn't need to be near anyone to benefit from her power. Honestly, her Septima low-key reminds me of Sarah from Mega Man Legends. Anyway, this gives Gunvolt horrible flashbacks to what Samaragi was trying to do with Jewel, and while Zed's reasons are righteous, they are still trying to use someone else's powers for his own benefit at the end of the day, and that's not going to fly at all. When it seemed like it was time to put Mobius back to sleep, Mobius denied his nap time by slapping Kirin with a mystical space typhoon and undid the seal on Gunvolt in the process, allowing him to become human again. Then Mobius attempts to make a beeline towards Kirin, only for Gunvolt to stand in the way and become absorbed by the dragon ruler. At this point, Gunvolt is now under control of Mobius and urges Kirin to kill him while there is still time. But Kirin doesn't want to and convinces Gunvolt to fight it out while she finds another way to prevent the future Gunvolt foresaw. Now here's a bit of a pro tip. All I'm going to tell you is that at some point you're going to be able to expose Mobius from Gunvolt's body. When this happens, don't slash the baby. Just keep spamming talismans instead until it goes away, rinse and repeat, and you'll get the better ending of the game. If you slash him even once, that automatically puts you in line with the bad ending. And if you want to unlock everything this game has to offer, you don't want to get that bad ending. Anyway, let's continue. During their scrap, Mobius activates Astral Order, which made him invincible and creates an area that was going to reduce Kirin to bits. But just as she bites the dust, Zed and Lila gave Kirin a helping hand with a combination of their Septimas and allow her to finish the job. With both Gunvolt and Mobius sealed, and Gunvolt's body reverting to that of a baby before he is fully engulfed in a ball of light similar to a cyber elf, Gunvolt manages to gain control over Astral Order and realizes that the vision he saw earlier would have happened regardless of what anyone did, and Mobius was only trying to prevent that future from happening all along. Then Mobius tells Gunvolt that they should use Astral Order to reincarnate themselves in a weaker form and buy enough time for Kirin and her group to create a good future without the need to take Gunvolt out of the picture. And that concludes the story of Gunvolt 3 and the entire Gunvolt series, really. Kirin is now picking up the torch where Gunvolt had left off, and she and the Dragon Saviors are now leading the charge. While I want to end the synopsis of the game on a story with a positive note and say that my initial thoughts had changed after replaying it, I can't shake this feeling of emptiness and remaining unfulfilled with that ending, and I remembered exactly why. The main issue with Gunvolt 3's story is that it genuinely does not feel like an actual continuation that should have picked up right after Gunvolt 2 and abandoned a decent number of important loose ends that needed to be tied up. For example, we know that at the end of Gunvolt 2, Copen's sister Myrtle is supposed to be living her best life, and this extends over to Jules since she and Myrtle are now one. But what happened with Copen and how did he move forward? Gunvolt 2 ends with this man's abandoning his whole identity as Copen so he can live on as an Avenger who is hell-bent on seeing his mission through to the end, leaving players wondering if he's going to return and eventually take out his sister in the process. Granted, when you consider the fact that the population for Adepts had grown immensely over the years, it's safe to assume that our Avenger ain't avenging no more. Either he made peace or he got caught lacking. But we'll never know any of that because the game does not revisit this at all. We don't know what happened to Quill. You only get a little context on Quinn's whereabouts if you spam that optional chat mechanic long enough and hope that the dialogue finally pops up, because this is the only way we would have learned about why Gunvolt left her. And how about that foreshadowing Shao left at the end of Gunvolt 2 if you got the secret ending? The writers took one look at all of that and tossed it out of the window, ruining any significant value that ending could have had. Imagine seeing one of those secret cliffhangers you see at the end of Kingdom Hearts after meeting the requirements to witness them, only for the next game to completely omit those endings and play no role in the story whatsoever. Do you have any idea how much of a slap in the face that would be to a lot of fans who loves that series and worked to get those endings? Nomura would never hear the end of it, and he has a lot on his plate already. Instead of getting those loose ends tied up, what we got was a lame time skip with Gunvolt suddenly becoming the Blue Eyes White Dragon, de-digivolves into Galgamon when Kirin seals him up, cleans up Samaragi's mess and clap the knights on the way, only for Homeboy to digicross with a baby dragon and reincarnate himself just to buy more time to prevent an apocalypse from happening. This is not the same story we've been following from the past two games anymore. The only reason I can think of as for why they abruptly ended the story like this is because Inti is probably done with making games that are centered around Gunvolt and wanted to move forward with a new character that can give them more room to play around with. Heck, I've seen this done with Insomniac and how they transitioned from Spyro to Ratchet, wanting to make a game that shares the same bones but with a character and setting that really lets them get their creative juices going. Or they probably did this to give Gunvolt a brand new start entirely, seeing as how if you look at the dialogue at the end of the story, Gunvolt literally says if he could do things all over again. Something along those lines. If that is the case, I can understand, but there had to have been a much better way to do it. Who knows, maybe I'm thinking way too deeply into it and I'm wrong all along. But what I do know is that the conclusion to this story is straight buns, and they can do better. Now, let's talk about the game itself, and you might want to sit tight because man, this game went through a massive overhaul. As I said earlier, Gunvolt 3 puts you in control of two characters, Gunvolt, who is our returning hero in this franchise, and Kirin, who is a new face we get to play as now. Starting things off with Kirin, she plays very much like Zero from the Mega Man X series with that added flair from the Gunvolt games. Her main source of damage is going to come from her sword, which she is given the classic triple hit combo, the $2 slices in midair, and she can swing at enemies while she's running. She can also deflect or negate certain projectiles by cutting at them with her sword. Along with her sword attacks, Kirin has access to her talismans, which can be thrown straight ahead or diagonally depending on where you're aiming. These talismans don't do any damage themselves, but what they can do is amplify your damage output. The more talismans you have stacked on someone, the higher your sword damage is going to be once you slice them. Keep in mind though, she does not have unlimited use of these things. Kirin starts off with 7 talismans and their ammunition can be expanded upon later. Just like how Gunvolt's EP and Copen's bullets work, Kirin's talismans will passively recover by itself, but you can speed up the process by striking a marked enemy, as that will automatically return those talismans, or you can do it manually by hitting down twice. Just be aware that if you refresh your talisman, talismans this way, this will cause all of your stacks to fall off. Kirin can also activate an ability she's acquired with Gunvolt's help, known as the Arc Chain, which involves Kirin flash stepping to any number of marked enemies and slice them in the process. She can also perform an additional jump after using this attack to keep her in the air as needed. The damage output is of course amplified if you stack talismans on an enemy over and over, plus you can hit left or right to change where Kirin is going to appear at the end of the chain, which is in front or behind the target. This is very useful for getting around tankier enemies without losing momentum or putting yourself out of harm's way. It goes without saying that the Arc Chain is easily one of the best additions to the Gunvolt series, as mastering this move is going to allow us to find both offensive and defensive uses, plus during boss fights this could set you up for some stylish plays. Once you get the hang of it, you'll find yourself slicing and dicing more times than Tidus could count with his overdrive skill. All in all, I really love this ability and it is a great addition to this game. Real quick, there's an extra detail I recently discovered about the Arc Chain ability. Back when I talked about this game called Code Bunny, which I suggest you check that video out for more details, I had mentioned in that video that a character named Hazel uses a similar ability inspired by Kirin's Arc Chain. However, to my surprise, it turns out that Code Bunny had actually displayed their use of that move known as the Ghost Crescent in earlier builds for their game. This was showed off roughly a whole year before NT showcased their move during the trailer. So if anything, Code Bunny actually beat them to the punch when it comes to conceptualizing this move. I felt that I needed to mention this here since I always believed it was the other way around and needed to correct that mistake. But now let's shift gears back to Gunvolt 3. Like in previous installments, Kirin does have access to the Pervasion ability. When she gets hit, the Pervasion will consume 4 talismans at first and can be upgraded to consume less. But any talisman that is consumed this way will not passively recover. You're going to need to do that manually if you want to get them back. The last thing I need to talk about when it comes to Kirin's moveset is that she can learn more techniques almost the same way Zero does from the Mega Man X games. The first set of bosses she defeats will teach her these new moves, while the later is going to enhance those techniques to make them better. Finally, when the chips are down and you just want to hit everything in a blink of an eye, or you want to deal a large amount of damage to the bosses, Kirin has access to her signature move, which is basically a screen nuke. Just like with any SP skill, it will go on cooldown before you're able to use it again. Now let's shift gears over to Gunvolt. While he still has his running and gunning gameplay style, the new abilities they stacked onto him almost changed Gunvolt into a completely different character. For one, Gunvolt's flash field is now active forever and operates in a similar fashion to Copen's barrier, where it automatically protects Gunvolt from certain projectiles, plus enemies will take damage if they come in contact with his flash field. His flash field lock-on functions the same as it always had in the past 2 games, though it is slightly nerfed here since the bolts themselves no longer hit enemies instantly, rather they have actual travel time. If you activate his lightning without locking onto anything, the bolts will just fly everywhere without damaging everyone. Gunvolt's aerial capabilities have also received a massive upgrade, as the Azure homie can now jump and air dash indefinitely. Plus, we're able to influence the direction of his air dash by holding up or down when doing so. Hey, with this, we can finally dash up those long shafts in the exact same way Sigma does in the X series. But this is not the only thing they gave to Gunvolt. While he unfortunately lost the SP skill systems from the first 2 games, he did gain a set of new techniques called the Voltaic Arts. Starting with the Lightning Assault, this is basically Gunvolt's version of the Arc Chain, where he'll be able to teleport to a marked enemy and zap them in the next week. He can also hit the same targets multiple times without the need to retag them if the enemy happens to be a bit tankier than the rest. The only downside to Lightning Assault is that unlike the Arc Chain, Gunvolt won't hit every marked target in one flash, and he will require you to hit the button multiple times in order to do that. It's still a great move for Gunvolt to have in his kit for the same reason Kirin has her Arc Chain. But my personal favorite is the Spark Dash. Gunvolt took a page from Copen's book, as he's now able to tag enemies by dashing into them, then bouncing off his enemies just like his rival. If he happens to dash into an enemy that's already tagged, however, he'll perform a Spark Dash, which involves phasing right through the enemy in a short burst of speed, then hitting them with several lightning bolts shortly after. With mastery, you can do this to multiple enemies at a time and immediately notice the speed increase in Gunvolt's movement due to how seamless this technique really is, and I love spamming it as often as I possibly can. But that isn't all the Spark Dash can do. If you happen to dash into an enemy that is fully tagged, Gunvolt will take his enemies to Suplex City and perform the devastating Voltaic Buster. This move will instantly destroy anyone who is caught by this, plus the impact is a screen nuke that can take out multiple enemies at once. You can also use this move on bosses, but only if their health is low enough for you to do so, otherwise you'll just perform the Spark Dash instead. Still, you can imagine the amount of glee I had on my face when I found out about this move. From that point forward, I made it my personal mission to suplex or clothesline every single boss in the game if I can help it. Finally, Gunvolt has access to his signature moves, the Astrosphere, the Luxcalibur, and his Voltic Chains. The move you have access to is entirely dependent on the amount of feathers Gunvolt currently has. Think of it like a resource that is directly tied to him. You can also freeze that resource consumption by pressing down twice and holding it there. At first I didn't quite register the significance of doing this, but the whole purpose of this move is to simply wait out unfavorable events until it is safe to move again. Heck, this works very well against bosses who remain stationary in one spot for a set period of time, letting you go for max level cheese right here. Speaking of resources, you might have picked up on the lack of any mentioning of EP. You know, the energy Gunvolt needs to use his attacks and activate his pervasion. Well, that's because there isn't any. Gunvolt is free to use his abilities as many times as he wants, and he can even take as many pervasion hits as he likes. The guy is pretty much a big old walking cheat code. You're able to switch to Gunvolt at any point as long as the conditions are met, and he just breaks a game in half because of what he's able to do. Don't like dealing with these harder platforming sections? Skip him with Gunvolt. Is the boss using its desperation move and you're bad at dodging it? Skip him with Gunvolt. Is the level throwing you into a space where there's a lot of verticality and don't have time to deal with it? Well, you get it by now.
Skip it. Come on everybody, skip it.
Like I said, Gunvolt in this game is a walking cheat code. He can't die, has limitless energy, extremely mobile, and his damage output is greater than Kirin's. At this point, why would I even want to bother playing as the Battle Priestess when I could just play as the better character of the two? Well, that's because there's a big catch to all of this, but I'm going to come back to this topic later on. What I can talk about for the time being is a change that was made to two of Gunvolt's returning mechanics, the Kudos system and the Anthem. Starting with Kudos, both Gunvolt and Kirin can rack up those points by doing cool things, though it is harder for Gunvolt to do that. As usual, if you rack up 1,000 of them, Lumen will come out and sing the songs of her people, allowing us to jam out while we're playing the game. Kudos is actually much easier to retain this time around since you won't lose them all if you take a hit. What does happen instead is that your Kudos points will lock up and you won't be able to earn any more unless you gain enough points to remove that lock. The higher your Kudos points are, the harder it will be to remove that lock, which isn't really going to be too much of an issue unless you're above 4,000. Now, personally, I'm indifferent to this new Kudos system. On one end, I like it to a degree because now you're guaranteed to hear Lumen's songs no matter what difficulty you're playing on. But on the other hand, the novelty will wear off quite fast due to how often you hear this music. Now granted, this game's home to one of my favorite Lumen tracks, as I will almost never get tired of listening to it. But after a while with having Lumen show up in less than a minute depending on how well you're doing, you may get to a point where you just want to put her on mute. Not in the same fashion as Osmoth, mind you. Another reason why I prefer to put her on mute, and this is more of a me thing, I kind of find her sprite to be a bit too distracting. During normal stage play, it's not really a problem at all. It's when I'm in the middle of a boss fight that's when her sprite becomes an issue. Between watching out for attacks, keeping your eyes on the boss, and also your own positioning, the last thing I need to see is this giant pixie flying all over the place while you're frantically moving about. There's just too much visual interference once she's in the picture, and I found myself getting hit a lot more because I either couldn't see the other effects as well, or her sprite just throws me off due to how often she moves. Like I said, it could just be a me thing, but this is a whole nother reason why I needed that mute button. Thankfully, there is a way to do that, but it's not going to be available for you right away. I'll explain why that is the case later on. Then, there are the changes that were made to the anthem mechanic. In previous games, when your health reaches 0, you had a chance to be resurrected with an unlimited use of your resources, and you were near invincible on top of that. Well, if Kirin happens to die and the anthem activates, she'll be replaced by Gunvolt, who enters an awakened state, greatly amplifying all of his powers in the process. If you thought Gunvolt was a cheat earlier, now he's just straight up broken. He can fly in every direction, he can now automatically lock onto enemies instead of having to tag them, Flash Field now activates an Astrosphere outright, the Spark Dash will always spawn a Lux Caliber, and he can use Voltic Chains as many times as he likes. And of course, the damage output is through the roof. However, you need to quickly finish the job because you're operating on an invisible timer. Every time Gunvolt uses any of his abilities, especially his heavier hitting ones, or takes too much pervasion damage, that clock will tick faster, and if it reaches 0, Gunvolt will turn into a Primal Dragon and activate his skill, Vanishing World, which is basically a game over screen. This had caught me by surprise the first time it happened, and it's a really neat twist on the anthem system we've had in these games prior, including the Copen spin-offs. Sometimes I will try to activate it on purpose just to play around with it more and have fun obliterating everything in my path before he changes into that Primal Dragon if I don't make it to the boss on time. This game also revised how you're able to upgrade your characters. Crafting accessories are no longer a thing. Instead, this game introduces an image pulse system, replacing the accessory stuff entirely. Throughout these stages, you'll come across these diamond-looking collectibles called image fragments. If you happen to collect enough of these, the game will reward you with a number of image pulses after the results screen and will be presented to you as if you are playing a gacha game, because that's basically what this is. They even do the thing where image pulses with higher rarity are going to come in with some kind of quote, just like how you're receiving one of those SSR units in other gacha games. These image pulses are not only callbacks to other characters that appear throughout the Gunvolt series, they also come in two different types: passive and active pulses. The passive ones work as if you're equipping an accessory that will enhance on what your character is able to do, like sticking onto walls, jumping higher, or increasing their damage output. They also come in either single or triple stars. The triple stars often being much better because they not only give a greater stat value, they can also be upgraded as long as you have the bread to pay for it. Although not all of them can be upgraded. Some of these are absolute must-haves depending on your playstyle, while others leave more to be desired. How is it that we have 3 variants of Copen, all of them being in the 3-star category, and they all do the exact same thing and cannot be upgraded? They are just disrespecting my boys out here. Meanwhile, if we take a look at the active pulses, these are your new SP skills. They can range from summoning characters to deal additional damage, or providing some kind of level support like refreshing your skills cooldowns, or keeping you alive with their heals. Additionally, some of these pulses can deal bonus damage to bosses if you happen to know what their weaknesses are. I was experimenting with these at first, but I ended up packing nothing but support types throughout most of my runs once I got them, since I felt like Kirin already does enough damage on her own, especially if you enhance her with these passive image pulses. Don't get me wrong, it is a neat little idea, I just didn't find much use out of it outside of healing myself and a few other things. Also, remember when I said earlier that you could turn off Lumen's anthems? Well, getting the passive image pulse that comes with the ability is the only way to do it. Can't say I agree with the decision to lock a basic function behind a gimmick instead of just having it from the jump. Now, in true Gunvolt fashion, or more accurately Mega Man, since that is the series that inspired the bones for this game, you will be given the option to pick which stage you want to tackle first, battle your way to the end, and scrap with whatever boss is standing in your path to victory. As you can expect, all the level designs will not only match the theming of that current adept you're dealing with, but they also craft it in a way that will constantly test the player's mastery of the new new tools that they will have at their disposal, most of these revolving around how well you're able to use Kirin's arc chain. Every last stage was designed with this ability in mind, as most of the enemy placements and stage hazards become easier to deal with as you progressively get better with this skill. Like in this situation here where you need to quickly use your arc chain to dart around these shutters before you're trapped in a room full of mines, or when you need to use the enemies as footholds to avoid certain hazards. Granted, you don't need to approach every situation relying on the arc chain, as you are free to complete these levels at a slower pace. However, it will be far more rewarding if you take the time to experiment when and where you will be able to use this ability to your advantage. Now that I think about it, Gunvolt 3 can almost be played as a momentum-based platformer if you really want to approach it that way. And they made sure that the levels complement that playstyle should you desire to make that your game plan. This doesn't just go for Kirin, but also for Gunvolt as well, even if he's not cheating his way through everything. I also must point out that Gunvolt 3 really stepped up its soundtrack, as this game has the best stage music across all three of the games hands down. Not saying that the music is bad in the first two games, it just wasn't all that memorable aside from a few tracks here and there, and most of the effort went into their anthem themes. But here in Gunvolt 3, this game actually provided us with some great tunes for once, as each of these wonderful sound pieces captures the essence of the Mega Man Zero franchise, and it's exactly what the Gunvolt games should have had from the gate. This is another reason why I needed Lumen to have that mute button. They also took this a step further by having these stage themes switch to a different variation depending on who you are currently playing as. Kirin's version tends to be a bit softer and has more grace, which is fitting for the character and maintains an upbeat presence all throughout these themes. But once you switch over to Gunvolt, his tend to contain more drums and gives off a strong techno vibe while adding a layer of intensity to his version. If you listen for yourself, the differences are like night and day. I tend to lean more towards the Gunvolt remixes when it comes to the two styles, but I can easily say that you cannot go wrong with either one. Alright, let's get back on track and talk about these bosses. As always, NT does not miss when it comes to creating really great designs, as these are probably the coldest designs I've seen in their games. And as always, their Septima matches their current appearance to further sell their look. The Ruthless Cayman, for example, has the Duelist Septima, and all he wants to do is give you the hands. His fight will progressively make it difficult to keep your distance too, since he'll put up hazards that will often force you to fight him up close. The Alluring Sestina, on the other hand, is the exact opposite, and her Trick Shot Septima will live up to its name, and she'll often bombard you with bullets that will either zero in on your location or change their trajectory on a dime while she keeps her distance as often as possible. One of her moves is also a straight up skill check, as you need to rely on the arc chain in order to avoid it entirely. In fact, all of these fights are designed with all of your new abilities in mind. Everything these bosses will throw at you can either be handled normally while having some good old bobbing and weaving skills and knowing where to position yourself, but there are some exceptions where you need to use that arc chain to get out of certain attacks. Some of these bosses will put you through the dirt at first, but as you figure things out and cleverly incorporate your arc chain ability, you can create a good number of openings where you're able to not only defend yourself, but also remain on the offensive at the same time. Now, if you're a heavy Mega Man fanatic, you can easily tell where some of these attacks came from, but aside from that, these battles are very fun and have a sense of identity to the individual you're fighting against, and I hardly found any of them to be too much of a hassle to deal with, even right up to the final boss fight against the possessed Gunvolt. With that being said, and sticking strictly to the Gunvolt trilogy, I still say the first game has the hardest final set of bosses to deal with, mainly between Copen, Nova, and Osmov, but that does not mean you're allowed to slouch with Gunvolt 3, as they can sneak in a victory if you allow it to happen. There's one last thing I need to point out when it comes to these boss fights. When you defeat them, there's a chance they might go out with a little surprise. Yeah, NT decided it was time we got a taste of our own medicine and gave each of the main bosses, barring Mobius, a chance to be revived by Luxia's anthem. Now while this may seem dire at first, since now the shoe is on the other foot and we know how powerful the anthems are, the bosses will retain the same moveset and they can also use their desperation moves at will. Aside from that, there really isn't any other changes. Also, that full health bar is a bold-faced lie, as you can melt that down faster than melting butter. At first, this was an interesting twist and made me think twice about relaxing once the fight was over. But once realization had settled in and came to the conclusion that these are just weaker versions of the bosses at the end of the day, it once again wore off its welcome and went from being a good concept that kept me on my toes to a minor annoyance. Ah well, nothing a good old suplex can't fix. All this really needed in order to have more impact is if the bosses had something that made them more threatening, like having all of their attacks ignore your pervasion ability. Since we know how strong the anthems are, it only made sense they would at least get some kind of power boost to make them scarier when it happens. Great idea, but also a missed opportunity. Once you've beat the game, there's the usual secret missions and the boss rush modes like the previous two, but you also unlock demanding and merciless tasks, which is basically the game's harder difficulties. Demanding will cap your health as if you are at level 1, with all of the bosses using harder variations of their attack patterns. Merciless, on the other hand, will lock you out of all of your passive image pulses. Sure, you'll have access to your active ones, but they are now a one-time use instead of going on a cooldown. Completing these tasks is not only a good way to test your skills and seek a harder challenge, but this is also where you can acquire some more image pulses that cannot be obtained in the normal mode, so you're definitely encouraged to give these a shot. Additionally, Kirin and Gunvolt will also have an exclusive mode to themselves, though Gunvolt will require a bit more work than just beating the game. For Kirin, she'll have access to her double X trigger, which powers up all of her current moves and gives her 2 additional abilities, one where she's able to summon several clones to zero in on her targets, and a counter that only activates against melee attacks, along with an upgraded version of her special. Just bear in mind that while she is stronger in this mode, pervasion will be disabled here. As for Gunvolt, he gets access to the denizer mode, but like I said, you need to put in more effort to unlock it than just beating the game. Once you have it unlocked, however, this is a mode where you're able to play as Gunvolt in more of an old school setting, going from one stage to the next in a single gauntlet. You won't have access to Kirin at all, it's just you and the Azure Striker. Now, I would be pretty excited about this mode, but there's a reason why I'm not. We will get to that soon enough. The last mode I need to talk about is episode ATEMS. In this smaller campaign, you're actually playing as Zed this time. He's basically a combination of both Gunvolt and Kirin rolled into one character, since he has some of Gunvolt's mobility and ranged attacks, while also having Kirin's playstyle, his sword dealing more damage than his ranged option. He also has 4 different skills which are the exact same moves he will use against you during his boss fight. Unlike Kirin and Gunvolt's campaign, he only has access to the first 4 stages and a final one for himself. All this really does is set up for a possible sequel where he will likely become a playable character in the next game, or maybe he'll just get a game all to himself. But if I have to be honest, I didn't really like playing as Zed too much. If you've been gaming forever, I'm sure you've come across a meme joking about how a boss character becomes weaker as you unlock them as a playable character, and unfortunately that is exactly how it felt when I was playing Zed. He just feels a bit clunky for me to use compared to both Gunvolt and Kirin, whose movesets not only feel seamless when dealing with these threats, but also have a way of amplifying their damage output. Zed doesn't have any of that going for him. You either stay far away and pelt your foes with weak birds, or get in close and use your sword in order to gain that better damage output, which is how I ended up playing him throughout most of his campaign. There is some potential for him to be a fun character, but for right now, he definitely needed more time in the oven. But okay, for a while I've been hinting at something quite a few times in this video, and it's time I finally address the very thing that I know pissed off a lot of fans when they played this entry. Are you guys ready for the hard truth? Because I'm 100% sure Gunvolt himself was not ready for that. This is not Gunvolt's game. I will say it again for the people in the back and who are still in denial. This is not Gunvolt's game. It's not a proper sequel, and your boy got done dirty. But if you still don't believe me, allow me to break it down. Let's revisit that topic when you're playing as Gunvolt in the main campaign. As I have stated earlier, you can switch to Gunvolt at any point during your gameplay, but only if certain conditions are met. Whether or not you meet those conditions are all going to fall within your feather gauge, which is indicated by this nice little meter right under your health. Anytime Kirin lands any of her attacks, whether it's her sword or the use of the arc chain, her feather gauge will fill up. Once it's at 100% or above, that is when you're able to switch over to the powerful Azure Striker. Here's the thing, the entire time you're playing as Gunvolt, that feather gauge will slowly deplete over time, and as you're using Gunvolt's attacks or taking any pervasion damage, that feather meter is going to deplete even faster. Plus, using any of Gunvolt's stronger moves like his Voltaic Buster or his Lightning Assault without additional targets will take huge chunks out of that resource, while his SP skills will consume the entire meter outright, and you'll revert back to Kirin once the animation is over. To simply put, Gunvolt here is nothing more than a tool, a powerful resource for the player to use. Another way to look at it, as I had mentioned earlier in my older video that I've done on this very thing, he's a Devil Trigger, a transformation that can boost your abilities and mop the floor with anything around you, but that power can only be experienced in short bursts. You can't go around freely exploring all the things Gunvolt can do or simply enjoy his gameplay in a more relaxed, casual style of play. You can only rent the character for a few minutes or even less than that depending on your skill level, then he goes bye-bye until you build up enough resources to summon him again. This right here is the very thing that I know had upset a lot of fans, myself included. It's one thing to completely throw out any of the story elements that would have allowed this game to continue as a proper sequel, but now they decided to sideline Gunvolt as a resource instead of letting him be the main focus for this game. Back when Inti was showing off the earlier stages of gameplay along with the trailers for this title, I was under the impression that this game was going to have a character switching mechanic similar to that of Mega Man X7 and 8, instead of giving both characters its own separate campaign like they've done in Gunvolt 2. Based on how the X series had a similar progression system regarding multiple characters between X4 and leading up to X7, where you started playing as two Maverick Hunters at the same time, this seemed like it was the correct move to make. Gunvolt would still get a lot of shine in his series that it's centered around him, Kirin would also get her time in the spotlight, and players will have the best of both worlds with the ability to switch between either character on the fly or stick with one the entire playthrough. No one told Inti to sideline the homie with his own game series, then try to make it seem like he's not being sidelined by making him as broken as they possibly can. I'ma say it again, this is officially Kirin's game, not Gunvolt's. But hold up, didn't I mention earlier that Gunvolt had a mode exclusive to himself known as Denizer? Yeah, let's talk about that because I've also stated that I was not too fond of that mode either. First off, in order to unlock Denizer mode, you need to not only beat the game to acquire the image pulse that will allow you to play as Gunvolt from the start of any stage you pick, you also need to clear 3 stages from start to finish as Gunvolt without switching back to Kirin at all and earn the SS rank as a result. At first, this seems like it should be a breeze since Gunvolt is busted, but as you attempt to do this challenge, you'll quickly learn that it's not as easy as you may think it is. Due to the fact that everything you do, including breathing, consumes your feather gauge, you will find it very difficult to maintain that form throughout the entire level without switching back. And this is without factoring that taking damage or using your stronger moves will make it much harder to do. If you want any chance of unlocking Denizer, you need to train yourself to play this game as a damn near flawless speedrunner in order to get the job done. You're going to have to memorize the levels, the enemy placement, and knowing exactly how to maximize every action while making sure you are not making any unnecessary moves. Now, as someone who enjoys playing these games and getting better at them with time, this is not too big of a detriment for me personally, but not everyone wants to do that, especially if that isn't how they enjoy these kinds of games. Not only that, but I don't think it was a good move to unlock a mode dedicated to the main character behind such a difficult task either. However, the reason why Inti made it so difficult for you to unlock Denizer is because this is how the game prepares you for what you will be doing the entire time. In Denizer mode, you are going from one stage to the next in a single run as Gunvolt, very much like a gauntlet mode. I should mention that the bosses you fight while you're playing this mode will be in their demanding task versions, so if you're not used to the more chaotic movesets, you'll be seeing that game over screen very often when you attempt to play. While some of the characteristics on how your feather gauge behaves are different compared to the main campaign, the main goal still applies. You must not run out of feathers here, otherwise it is game over and you're going to have to start all the way back at the beginning of the gauntlet. The only major differences you need to be aware of when maintaining your feathers is that your SP skills no longer instantly consume all your feathers, but rather a large portion of them, and your feathers run out even faster when Gunvolt is using his air dashes and multiple jumps. Players will also be punished a lot more if they foolishly rely on his lightning assault without tagging multiple targets for him to destroy, but you can gain a lot of feathers if you spam that ability on a single target with a lot of health. Gunvolt can activate his berserk state by hitting both of the triggers, though it will take longer to do depending on his feather meter. It's great for getting you out of a tight spot, but this will progressively build a denizer counter that will not reset when he clears a stage. If that counter reaches its maximum output, it will also result in a game over. You can strengthen Gunvolt by purchasing accessories that will power up certain attributes to make your next run a bit smoother, but even with these power-ups, this is by no means a chill mode for those who want to play the game for the character they likely purchase it for, which is Gunvolt. Yeah, there are additional accessories that will make this mode a bit more manageable, but they are locked behind paid DLC, which contains more image pulses for the main game and accessories for Denizer. While this DLC is very cheap, I still don't feel like paying for it when it's really just for more image pulses and accessories. This is where the bulk of my issues are with this game. If we remove the Gunvolt factor and objectively look at the entire game as a whole, this game is phenomenal. From its visuals, mechanics, sound direction, stage design, even with the stuff that bothered me while I was playing, I was still able to have a really good time, even as I was replaying it now for this video. So the players who don't care about Gunvolt, its lore, its legacy, and all that stuff, and they're just strictly here for the gameplay alone, you'll have an excellent time with it, no problem. But to those who are mainly here for Gunvolt, the continuation of his story, wondering what happened to past characters, and even just to play as Gunvolt himself in a more chill setting instead of having to lean forward all the time, this is most definitely going to leave a bitter taste or make you outright dislike the game because of it, and I would not blame you if that ended up happening. A majority of people who played this series is here for the Azure Striker, but as you can see, NT denies all of that.
Move this man!
I mean, look at this cover art. This is more on me for not noticing it sooner, but they even got Homeboy in the back. He's not even front and center. He is in the back. As I said, maybe NT is just done with the character and wants to move on to other things or take the series in a completely different direction where they can do more, but there had to be a better way to do it. Presenting the fans with a game where you really don't play as him all that much in the main campaign without a certain condition, then make them fight for the right to play as Gunvolt, but now with a lot of restrictions and abruptly ending his story with elements that just came out of nowhere, it all just feels wrong. Honestly, at this point, Gunvolt has every right to become a villain. He couldn't save the girl, severely injured his love interest, crawled back to a company that is known for doing heinous stuff for help, was sealed away forever only for things to get worse, and he's not even allowed to be the main character in his own game anymore. Gunvolt just can't have shit, can he? One thing I will say that has changed from my older video to now is that I low-key owe X7 an apology. At least once you've unlocked X in that game, you can permanently play as him without having to worry about a proverbial time clock and a bunch of restrictions that keep you from enjoying the character. But I'm going to leave it there for now and wait and see if NT does anything interesting with it in the future. I mean, at least we did get a nice rhythm game out of it, right? Well, I enjoyed that rhythm game. Anyway, that's all I got. If you stuck it all the way out here to the end and sat through what admittedly turned into a rant, I do appreciate you for lending an ear and also supporting the channel. Feel free to like the video if you dig it and hit that sickety sub if you're new, and I hope I get to see you all in the next one. Later!